You're now listening to Keeba-Live on the Disruptors Podcast Network. Welcome, everybody. This is your host, William Lee, and welcome to Keeba-Live, a controversial podcast. That's what everybody tells me it is, but, you know, I like doing this because it's live and I get an opportunity to talk about different subjects. We started this program several months ago on a Saturday evening, and it really worked out very well at first on our first run through, but unfortunately, well, things change here in the studio, and we decided to expand, and we have done so, and we're really excited about our expansion because we're going to be able to bring you more shows of special interest, also some good video podcasting in the future, and we're really excited. So let me get to what we're talking about today on this particular show. You know, a lot of my podcasts I've talked about different subjects that have really affected what I believe each community throughout the United States has been an important issue because these are topics that we need to start a simple conversation about. And here's one thing that really bothered me just recently, well, I should say for the last few months. That's the situation of trans children being changed sexual identity, trans people coming out kind of like where they came from nowhere and taking over our social media. And every time that we look in any type of media, it's always the question of discrimination against the trans. I think the whole topic started not too long ago, and a swimmer, and I want you to think about this, in sports, was competing on a college level, an NCAA level, and this gentleman, throughout years that he had been competing, never really did much. But all of a sudden, he decides, well, really, I'm really a girl, not a boy. And, of course, has gone through the changes. Not all of them, but many of them. And now is classified through his sexual identity as a female. Lila, I can't get through this, you know, because to me it's like I'm lying to the general public, but yet mentally I'm not comfortable with my body. How many times have we heard this? And when Mr. Thomas decided to swim and break all women's records because he was competing against women at the size of 6'1", by the way, it just brought the whole trans thing to light. And boy, what a fight it started. I couldn't believe it at first. The NCAA, they were, well, you know, we've got to make a rule. We've got to come up with some sort of a ruling. And their first ruling was, which I believe still is, their head is promptly glued into a block of stupidity. Because if you cannot tell that somebody's sexual identity in especially sports isn't really something that has to be judged by their physical ability, then you're losing whole sight of sports to begin with. Now, we all know that a man has larger lung capacity. In this case, the gentleman naturally had longer arms. So, of course, he could swim and beat most of the women that were there by, hundredths of a second or whatever timing that they use in the, sports, in the Olympics and all these other sporting events that are world, I think, tied to the world. Now, sporting has always been exciting. Hey, I'm a football fanatic, never played the game, hardly understand it at times, but it was interesting to me because it was a man's thing. You didn't see women run around football helmets being pulverized by 400-pound linebackers or blockers on the defensive team that wanted to smack you into the ground and make you into a grease spot over a little tiny ball. No, you didn't get to see that. And I'm glad we didn't, because to me, men's sports have always been men's sports. Now let's change the whole theory for just a moment, and let's take a look at men's basketball and women's basketball. So far, we've been very lucky that the infiltration of trans has not hit basketball, women's basketball. And I'm going to tell you the reason I think why. And it's really simple. There's not enough money. Yeah. You know, when you're working at this ideology that, well, I'm going to be the best performer I can be, is wonderful. And when people extend their talents and their abilities in sports, in many cases it pays very well. Sometimes you often wonder how some of these basketball players collected so much money for doing, well, not a whole lot. But there was a lot that goes into sports. You've got to train for sports. And the life expectancy of a good sports athlete is not something like if you went to work at a retail outlet selling clothes or something of that nature, because you've got a 10-year period as an athlete after you hit the pros. If you can survive for 10 years physically, it's marvelous, and they should be paid for their skills. But the question keeps coming up. Okay, if that's the case, why are you getting so upset with men changing into women and then competing? Shouldn't upset you at all. I mean, they're saying, hey, I'm not a man anymore, I'm a woman. The last podcast I did on trans was, well, several weeks back. I got into a discussion over this, and I think it's worth repeating before I bring up a special sound clip that really tells why I'm so interested in today's activity with trans. I brought out in my podcast, when I first started talking about this subject, that this is America, and you have the right and the freedom to do whatever makes you happy. Maybe some people feel that changing their sexual identity is the answer. I'm not sure. I am not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. But I am thinking in my own mind, when I made that statement, that God doesn't make mistakes. And if you're born male, then you should be male the rest of your life. Or if you're born female, then the choice is to live that sexual identity. Well, whatever you'd like to do with your sexual identity is your business, and I will respect those rights. But don't trespass me and try to force your ideology of sexual identity onto me, because I ain't buying it. I'm not going to go out of my way and discriminate against you. I'm not going to go out of my way and bully you. But I ask you prominently and respectfully for the same respect back, that you will live your life and let me believe and live my life. Now, as we know, social media is one of the greatest tools in the world, and it's done a lot. Social media's done a lot. Now, some people say all of a sudden, and we've heard it in the last few months, that social media has brought so much misinformation. Oh, misinformation about politics, about health, about everything you can think of. Well, my attitude is the haters have brought this up, not really people that are interested in what I consider social media. Social media is a great tool because it gives me an opportunity to voice my opinions about any subject without being under the thumb of the government, to a certain degree, of course. And the trans program that is being forced on us in schools, everywhere we go, there's either a situation of trans very upset because they're discriminated against, or trans are very upset because they don't have the rights that everybody else has. That's hogwash. If you're an American under the Constitution, you have your rights, no matter if you're trans or not. If you are a U.S. citizen in America, you have those inalienable rights, and you have the right to practice them freedom of speech is the best one that I think about all the time. But the rub comes in this particular controversy of how we decide, are we trans or are we not trans? And how do our children get involved in this trans war, a revolution of being trans and having your identity changed? How do kids from the ages of, say, 5 to 13 all of a sudden have their life changed? Well, here's something I want you to hear, and this is a young lady who I think really epitomizes and puts this trans thing into another perspective. This is what she had to say at a news conference, just recently. And I think, to me, the importance of what she has to say, and I want you to listen very closely, is that she's talking about maybe, just maybe, there's more to this trans thing than just an identity change, and what is the effect of an identity change if it's mishandled.
I should be at home with my family celebrating my 19th birthday, and instead I'm making a desperate plea to my elected representatives. Learn the lessons from other medical scandals like the opioid crisis, to recognize that doctors are human too, and sometimes they are wrong. My childhood was ruined along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks. This needs to stop. You alone can stop it. Enough children have already been victimized by this barbaric pseudoscience. Please let me be your final warning.
Powerful words from a young lady whose story goes on, and it is absolutely mortifying. It really, truly is. Because here's a young lady that went through the process with her parents. I don't want you to stop and think that she did this behind her parents' back. As she talks about in her interview on Fox television, as she talks about how she started in this journey of changing. And her parents took her through the processes that should be done, concerning, well, here is my child. She is feeling that she is disconnected from her peers in school, that there's a little occasion of bullying because at her particular age of around 13 years of age, started going through puberty and developed quickly, which put her at kind of odds with the rest of the girls in her class. She felt inside that she wanted to be a boy. She'd always thought all I wanted to do was to participate in boys' activities. She said, I felt like a tomboy. By the time she was 15 years of age and had gone through one group of psychiatric evaluations, when she went through counseling and all the processes that need to be taken to become a trans and make that decision at the age of 15, what should happen next. And what she has to say is absolutely horrifying. Her breasts were removed at 15 because she felt they were a disease, boils on her chest. It wouldn't allow her to be able to be like the boys, cutting her hair short and making changes so that she fit in with a crowd that wouldn't bully her, which would respect her for the abilities that she had, athletical, and the physical change that she was starting to make to become a boy. Now, you've just heard what she had to say to her state's government, asking for the butchery to stop, considering it barbaric. She is now very much so interested in working and bringing this trans change to light. It has nothing to do with discrimination. It has nothing to do with anything but simple what a child can and cannot reason and understand. Now, I've talked to several people about this. Some of them are physical therapists. I've talked to people that are therapy, mental health resources people, and they've all come to the same conclusion that you're not mature as a child until you're about 18 as a girl and around 20 as a boy to be able to make that differential change in your life if that's what you feel is necessity. And then to step back, take a look, and move through the processes that this young gal made when she was only 13 years old. Wow. Upsetting, isn't it? How many of you got grandchildren? I've got grandchildren. I worry about them figuring out how in the world is this going to all go together? How are they going to be able to go through life when they're considerably bombarded with sexual identity? Everything's based around my sexual identity. A child needs to be able to grow. Yes, there are problems during growth. Yes, when some boys were little, they played with dolls. When some little girls were little, they played and loved baseball. Who knows? But does that mean that with all the things that children have to face nowadays, with the fear that is constant, the fear of not knowing if when you go to school, the security of that school will be to the point where you won't have to worry about being shot, stabbed, or beaten, which seems to be popular things going on in schools nationwide. The children that are scared of books now seem to be a big issue in schools. About sexual identity in books and glorified information of history, wars, and things of this nature, which they feel that children should not see, but yet they're interested enough to let somebody in a school sit your child down and say, you know, Tommy, you probably are a girl. You just don't know that you are a girl yet. Now, we should talk about these things, and I'll get you some resources, Tommy, so you can understand. Now, we don't need to tell your parents right away. We just need now to work with you and focus on your identity. What a crock. We need to raise our own children. Schools need to get back to the point where sexual identity is not a course study from grade school through high school. Let's try arithmetic. Let's mess around with ideas of physical preparedness in schools called physical education. Let's talk about cooking again. Wouldn't that be something? Home ec, teaching girls how to cook. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Of course, most schools took that out because, you know, they might burn themselves or something. I don't know what the real idea was. Car mechanics has been taken out of schools. Metal shop, oh, that's too dangerous. They might hurt themselves with a hammer. Wood shop, oh, they're going to cut off a thumb, get rid of woodworking. Not in our schools, no way. But yet we can take time as educators, because we're smarter than parents, to go ahead and teach our kids that they need to have their body completely chopped up, their mind redone. We need to be able to have a firm hold on raising them and making sure their sexual identity is proper and correct. Hogwash again. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about more when we take a listen to a couple of things that I wanted to talk about today. Now, I have a gentleman in the studio. He's very short, and he has a message for us about some activity coming up that I think is very wonderful in the Pierce County area here in the state of Washington. And here he is, all the way from the North Pole, my friend and hopefully your friend, Grumpy.
Hi, everybody. It's Grumpy the Elf. And I live up here at the North Pole with Santa Claus at Santa's workshop. You know, that's where we make all the toys for Christmas morning for all the good boys and girls. Santa likes the holiday season because it brings a great sense of joy and love and giving. It's a time when families can come together, and it makes Santa very happy because the kids eagerly wait for the presents to be under the Christmas tree on Christmas morning. You know, he brings all these toys from the North Pole, and we elves work very hard stacking his sleigh through of great toys for everybody. But there's a sad note. Santa found out that some toys don't get delivered to good girls and boys because of financial problems with their family. And this brings a tear to my boss's eye. So, not too long ago, he found some very special people. He calls them Grandma Bill and Grandma Gail. And guess what? They have a toy giveaway. That's right, a toy giveaway. Because they remember how exciting when their children were growing up that Christmas morning was. And their goal is to bring joy and holiday to everybody that they can. And Santa will be working with them to make sure this dream comes true. So, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get a hold of Grandma and Grandpa and let them know how important this activity is to you, too. And if you have any toys that you can donate, they'll make arrangements to bring down the big slide van and pick them up. Now, all you have to do is call this number. Do you have a piece of paper and a little bit of a pencil there that you can write this down with? Grumpy the Elf wants to make sure you do it right. It's 253-272-8221. Or you can email at BOKWORM234@AOL.com. Now listen, I'm going to get grumpy if you don't email him right away. It's at BOKWORM234@AOL.com. Santa wants to thank you for your support in bringing smiles to all the faces of the good children at Christmas time.
Well, thank you very much, Grumpy. He really isn't that grumpy. He's a little short fellow, however. And his sexual identity has stayed the same since birth. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. No changes there. Santa Claus's elves are all boys or girls, and there's no controversy. So this is a great, by the way, opportunity for two people that really believe in Christmas and want to help families, because there is, without a doubt, financial problems in our economy. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people, unfortunately, have fallen into tough times after the pandemic, which really racked and caused so many hard problems financially for so many. Getting back on our feet again is going to be rough. So they've decided, as Grumpy was talking about, to go ahead and start this Christmas toy giveaway. It'll be at the First Christian Church in Tacoma at 602 South Orchard Street. Big, beautiful church. And I think you'll really find some wonderful people there working with Grumpy. Grumpy will be there. And we really, on this show, will be talking more about it. We'll be doing some live podcasting. What's exciting about this that Grumpy didn't talk about is that this is the fourth year that these two people, by themselves now, there's no corporate sponsors, they have done this and started this by themselves, literally. The first time they had it going, it was in their home, and they had set up their home, and they gave away many, many gifts. Had them all wrapped, and they had wonderful volunteers that helped them out doing this process of getting the toys out. The next year, they decided, well, wouldn't it be wonderful? And they moved it to the church, thanks to the First Christian Church wanting to work in community and help this program. And they've been there ever since. This year, they hope to supply toys to the needy kids. I would say probably a record amount, because when I sat down and talked to the grumpy grandma, as I call her when she gets mad at me, wonderful, wonderful lady Gail is, and Grandpa Bill, who will be on a podcast here next week, it was amazing to me that they are estimating that they can give out over 4,000 gifts this year. That'll be a record year for them. And wow, It's hard to believe, isn't it? Okay, well, that's kind of Christmas a little bit early, but the turkey has been eaten, so now it's time to start thinking about Santa Claus. So there's my Santa Claus first podcast of the year. Hopefully the next one will be without Grumpy. I tell you, the guy's really a nice little guy. He really is, but he does get grumpy. Woof. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about a moment or two history of trans and the flag. We Americans really truthfully, throughout our start of this wonderful nation, which has grown faster than any other nation in the world, is the most, as far as anybody in the world is concerned, richest, and the only free nation in the world that has a government that's set up the way we're set up under the Constitution. And, of course, we have Old Glory, a flag that says so much about history. And I really, truly, in my heart, hope that the schools don't decide to teach our children that the red stripes should come off the flag and maybe a rainbow should be put on Old Glory so that there's no discrimination. Boy, wouldn't that be a podcast to discuss. Every time I see Old Glory, I think of one thing, and that's the red stripes for starters. The red stripes indicate those that have given their life and served for this country. Those are the men who have died fighting for our freedoms. I just don't want Old Glory tampered with. And I'm sure many Americans feel the same way. And I'm also sure that there are trans and other societies that feel the same way as I do. Now, when you get down to the trans flag, it seems like every society group of individuals, no matter if they're homosexual or not, have a flag, and they like to flag that flag and show it and fly it as much as possible. I looked it up just to get an idea of the history of the flag and found out that it was actually put together by a woman. Yes. In 1999 was its first creation of the trans flag, which utilized different colors. In fact, if you notice on any billboard or any of the social media where activities of protesting is going on, you'll see their colors, their flag. And it was kind of interesting because it actually was in the first parade in Phoenix, Arizona in 2000. So when the world thought for sure that, the computers were going to die, there wouldn't be any more electricity, all the world was going to fall apart in the year 2000, which naturally it didn't. It was kind of interesting that then all of a sudden we started listening and understanding different society changes. Of course, let us be honest. Trans are not new. Homosexuals are not new. Humans are not new. I strongly believe that this trend of society has been locked up in a closet, thrown away the key, and left there for, probably thousands of years. I imagine there's been the trans theory or homosexual activities at the beginning. But the thing that has gone wrong in our country is that we are forcing, as I've talked at the beginning of this show, into pushing kids into making decisions that they're not mature enough to make. Now, what I want to do is I want to play you the rest of this interview. It's a little lengthy, but I think it'll really give you an understanding of where this young lady came from and what horrible dangers we could be facing in the future. So here she is.
Heartbreaking and powerful testimony on Capitol Hill today on the dangers of gender transition for children. A House subcommittee hearing firsthand from Chloe Cole, a detransitioner who was put on puberty blockers and then underwent a double mastectomy long before she turned 18. Now she is leading the fight to protect children from the irreversible harms done by gender transition treatments. And Chloe joins us in the studio now. Very powerful testimony. And I have to say, that's a really high-pressure situation. You were incredibly composed there. What was the message that you were trying to get across in your appearance today?
I wanted lawmakers and parents and really everybody to know that this is an issue that is very complex and it requires a lot of compassion and understanding. But the immediate thing to do, that we should do, is not to attend to the wants of these children with gender dysphoria, but to their needs.
Right. So it's incredibly complex, but are people who are involved in that side of it, gender therapists, gender consultants, I think some people even are they trying to simplify it to say, oh, you're a girl, but you're really a boy. So what we need to do is we need to give you puberty blockers. We need to give you testosterone. We need to take your breasts off, and then everything will be fine.
Right. I mean, once gender is brought up in the discussion, I mean, whatever mental health issues that the patient had before, it's completely thrown away. They just pivot immediately to gender.
I mean, that's the business that they're in, right? So right. We were talking off camera, and you said if you go to a knee surgery, you say, my knee hurts. There's a chance that somebody's going to recommend surgery on your knee. And it's the same thing for this, you think?
Yes. And with the standards of care now, I mean, this is being recommended so flippantly to children now. They're allowing children to direct the course of their own medical treatment.
So give us some insight in your story. You had a double mastectomy at the age of 15.
Yes.
What led you down that path to that mastectomy?
Well, I started puberty rather early, and I was very insecure about my body and the unwanted sexual attention that I was getting from my peers and sometimes adults. And I found it difficult at times to fit in with the other girls my age as someone who was a bit of a tomboy. And really, those were all pretty normal feelings for a girl my age. And I also had an unresolved sexual trauma that I felt like I couldn't trust any adults with talking about.
And so?
And so all those factors led into me wanting to get rid of my breasts. I started to see them over time as not breasts, but tumors that needed to be removed from my body. And I wanted to be like any other boy my age. I wanted to look just like them.
Now, were you just thinking that yourself, or did somebody bring you to that conclusion?
It was a conclusion that I came to mostly on my own terms. I was introduced to gender ideology through social media, but when I initially started transitioning both socially and medically, I wasn't really directly interacting with anybody in the transgender community at the time. And I was very determined to do this, and it was mostly something that I had led on my own. But it was under the pretense that this was the only option that I had, or that I thought I had.
So nobody said to you, well, slow down, let's take a look at this, let's examine the issues behind this and see if there's a different route?
No. I mean, they did a psychiatric evaluation before I was diagnosed and treated for gender dysphoria, and they knew at the time that I had a previous diagnosis of ADHD, that I likely had autism, and that I was struggling with social anxiety, but also that I was going through things that were perfectly normal for a kid my age, and that they told my mom and dad that it was either transition or suicide for me, but I wasn't.
Suicide or change your lifestyle, change your sexual gender. There it is, the answer to all questions when it comes to this issue. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the whole issue of this podcast tonight and what I've been talking about. You see, children are our leaders of tomorrow in this country. They are the ones that will pick up where we have left off. It is hard for me or any parent to stop and think about what if I would have done this differently for my child. What if things were changed? Would they have the time to adjust and excel? The gifts that God gave them, would they have time to unwrap those gifts and use them for the betterment of humanity and this country? This is another area that we have to look at. And right now, we are confusing our kids and pushing part of them, as you just heard, a young lady who had desires and thought that this was had to be done, who went through the process and then later, after what she considers barbaric things that happened to her, discovers that her life has been put on hold and ruined. And now she's speaking up. God bless her. She's coming out and starting a conversation. That's what will heal the world. Now, I had a good friend of mine say, Bill, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of in my life. I said, well, okay, maybe it is. But stop and think about something. 300 or how many years ago it was, there was a bunch of gentlemen that were upset with the British. Didn't like what they wanted, taxes, money. They wanted to run them around and take control of their lives. Oh, it was a horrible time. The Boston Tea Party. All those things in history, which I hope we continue to teach our kids, but may have to get rid of that because, well, that was violence towards tea. But on a more serious note, those were the people that sat around and started a discussion through conversation that built our country. Yeah, the action from the conversation that they had gave us right now freedoms that many countries do not have. We're blessed to have those freedoms. We're blessed to be able to call ourselves Americans. We're blessed to understand that in this land, the American dream that we have, the dream of owning homes and working in your potential, is available to you. I don't think you're going to find that in China. I know that Putin isn't going to allow you to have that in Russia. He's so busy removing all the Ukrainians off the earth because of ridiculous political and history, which is trying to repeat itself. We have I get so angry because we've got so much killing and things going on. The Palestinians are having a time in their life, I guess. Are they? No, they're not. They're being killed. Are the Israelites? What are they thinking about? I don't know. The war is such an interesting situation. Interesting in the fact of how history repeats itself, but there again, a deterioration. And when you have all these things mixed in, then you have to think about our kids here in America. And besides bringing the fear of war to our borders, we also bring the fear of rejection, and now we bring the fear of sexual anxiety that I'm just not the person that I feel I should be. I'm the wrong sex. My identity is incompletely just not right. You know what this balances out to? It balances out in the state of Washington that we need mental care. Resources in mental health need to be developed. You know, what would happen if, for instance, everybody came up with the idea that, I'm the wrong person? What would we do? What would happen? What would happen to our world, as this young lady has said, if we were all victimized to a surgeon's knife in the ideology that, they're just the wrong sex. They can't live the American dream because they're not the right pronoun. What happened to us? Sexual identity is as far as I'm concerned, virus that's probably more powerful than COVID-19. So the next time that you have an opportunity, I'm not asking anybody to go out of their way and protest and jump up and down because they've seen somebody with a sexual change or desire to be somebody else or some other human sexual person. all I'm saying is we need to basically give our kids a chance to make that decision. Let those that have made that decision live the American dream. And let's stop arguing amongst ourselves about who's who and why you're the way you are. But also, let's take the factor of greed, which a lot of people haven't looked at. You'll hear me on podcasts talking about the homeless and the greed that's caused all the homeless at this moment. You'll hear me discuss things of that nature, and you'll think to yourself, well, what does a homeless greed have to do with sexual identity? Well, if you listen real closely to that young lady, she pretty well spelled it out. Doctors make big buckos. Not all doctors are hash surgeons, as I call them. They want to just chop up, give them some pills, change them around. Okay, the insurance company will now send me a check for this. They've got. And all these wonderful things are going to buy me a new house, a new car, and a better lifestyle. No. Boris Karloff made a wonderful Frankenstein, didn't he? Well, I guess Frankenstein is back. Only unfortunately, it's our children that are on the gurney to be rolled into the operating room to have a change in a creation by other doctors. Who knows? History will tell the next generation and generations after that where we may have made mistakes or where, hopefully, we corrected our mistakes. I'd like to thank you for listening to our show tonight. This is the first one of Kiva Live that we did live on the air. You can find this podcast if you are wanting to check things out on Spotify or iHeartRadio or possibly your favorite podcast platform. There's a lot of them, and it's always a pleasure. We at the Disruptors Podcast Network have a group of shows that we bring out, trying to start conversations, trying to make a change in our communities, and try to just open the door to reasonable thinking and bringing back common sense. So, on that note, I'd like to also mention to you that we have a series of shows now called Revealing Wholeness with a good friend of mine, Dr. Troy Munson, who teaches us how to live better through nutrition and chiropractic treatment. So you'll want to check that show out also as soon as you can. You'll find it right with us on the Disruptors Podcast Network. So I close all my shows, even this one, which is quite famous now on it was a joke to start with, folks. Really, it was. I was out in the kitchen. We were doing some podcasts. My son says, wow, you know, you're such an old man. And, well, holy smokes, that's all I'm going to say. Yeah, you know, you got to come up with a title for a new show, Dad. And I said, what will that be if I could have one? And he said, well, Old Man Ranting. So guess what, folks? We started a show called Old Man Ranting from the Kitchen. And it's now kind of popular on Facebook. We've done over 70 shows. We enjoy it. And when you hear this sound, yee-haw, it's the Old Man Ranting from the Kitchen live podcast. Yeah, it's me again. We do it. It's a video show. We enjoy it. And that's on, we try to get in over the controversy of what Facebook is doing and Meta is doing. And as you heard this young lady say that social media is having an effect on kids, we try to get in there and talk a little bit and cover some of the points of what's going on. Give Mr. Facebook a bad time. It's hard to be a billionaire and not be loved by everybody for sure. Okay, hey, I like to close my shows with this simple thought for you to kind of mull over in your minds, but I hope it takes a planting in your subconscious that, you know, if you keep love in your heart and a helping hand up, you can, with a positive thought in your mind, always keep a smiling. Until next time, have a great, great holiday season, and we'll be talking to you again very soon.